Hi, I'm Chase Santorella.
And I'm Jack Long. Today we're going to be talking about how the diversity of social identity and race play into an individual's experience in college life, and specifically fraternity culture.
We're going to be hearing from several individuals who have first-hand experience with this during their time at college, and we will be discussing the experience in the context of several different sociological perspectives and concepts.
By talking with these people, we hope to get a better understanding of how these sociological concepts play out in a real environment and the factors that contribute to their continued prevalence within fraternity culture.
So the first guest we spoke with was my roommate, RJ Frankenberry.
RJ is a gay man, and in his 2 years here at Northeastern, he's had a lot of experience with fraternities through his professional law fraternity, as well as experience with fraternity night and social life through several of his friends.
So we're going to play a clip from our interview with him, and then talk about it a little bit afterwards.
Hi, RJ. How are you doing? Would you mind introducing yourself and kind of talking about your connections to Greek professional and social life for us?
Yeah, sure. My name is RJ Frankenberry. I'm a second-year student here at Northeastern studying environmental studies and economics. I'm originally from New York, and then here at Northeastern, I'm involved with the pre-law fraternity Phi Alpha Delta, and I've had some experiences with some of the more social fraternities through friends of mine.
Awesome, thanks. So would you mind telling us a bit about how you think that your social identity personally has affected your experience with Greek life on campus, both with the professional fraternity you were talking about and with the social fraternities?
Sure. So I'll start with my professional fraternity because it's obviously the place I know best. Phi Alpha Delta is a very diverse and inclusive place, so I would say honestly my introduction to the fraternity was I thought it was only girls at first because that's what I saw in our meetings, but then when I actually attended one, I realized that it was a co-ed fraternity, but I felt welcomed and included in everything there. But then with the social fraternities, I've obviously never rushed one myself, but I definitely considered it coming into college. I like having a social life and going out, so I definitely was interested in that aspect, but particularly the culture and the rush process just seemed very scary for me because of my identity. Not even scary, but just like not really meant for someone with my identity.
Wow, it's really great that you've found a place in your professional fraternity where you feel like you're comfortable and able to be your own social identity. So now, for our next question, we were wondering if you felt as though your experience with these fraternities, specifically the professional one, that you're expected to fulfill some role or play into certain stereotypes or characteristics due to your social identity as a gay man.
Within my professional fraternity, I don't feel it as much. Because like I said, it's pretty inclusive. We don't really even broach that subject. There's like no informal rush process. It's all very professional, and like I guess the only thing that I feel like I need to fulfill is having an interest in law and knowing a lot about it. But then with the social fraternities, though I never rushed, I definitely have heard like through the grapevine about especially the rush process in these fraternities, how it's geared a lot towards like attraction to girls and that whole locker room talk type thing that I've always kind of felt alienized from.
Sure, yeah. That's really great, again, that you found that community that you feel that does not alienize you or, push you to the side or try to push you into that social role. But I think it's really interesting to see that while you're saying there's not really a definitive discriminatory pattern with the social fraternities, just having that culture of, that locker room talk, like you said, does as like a secondary push you into that role and make you feel alienized. So kind of moving on, we were wondering if you had ever really had to deal with any specific discrimination based on your social identity, whether that be directly towards you or if you've witnessed any kind of like discriminatory practices or heard about it.
I mean, yeah, definitely throughout my life I've experienced it. I'm sure you guys can remember in middle school when like you'd call shit gay, that was stupid, and it was like that was an insult, or the F slur was thrown around always in my hometown. Definitely less so at school, but I do think it's apparent in certain areas. Like, I felt like in some of my more, even in my more like male-dominated classes, like a lot of my econ classes, sometimes I feel like I'm not taken as seriously because of my presumed sexual identity.
Wow, I'm really sorry that that's something that you had to go through, but thank you so much for being so open about it and sharing your experiences with us. Now, for our final question, we were wondering if there's anything that you think that you particularly could do to change the current state of fraternity culture. What would you change, and maybe how would you go about doing it?
That's a good question. I think the culture surrounding all Greek life probably needs to change. I think there's a lot of other issues like sexual assault and other stuff, discriminatory issues tied in with it. I think going about changing that would be a pretty tall task, but honestly, from what I've heard, fraternities have already changed so much with the times, and I think it's, at least here at Northeastern, reflective of the social changes. I think they're probably a couple steps behind and could use a push in the right direction, but as far as fraternities go, I'd say Northeastern is doing a decent job. Obviously, just working to be more inclusive. I heard after the BLM stuff last year, a lot of these organizations were adding like diversity and inclusion positions within their executive boards, and I definitely think that's a great step. Obviously, more needs to be done, but I think that's a good start.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean those are great thoughts. It's great to hear that you think that Northeastern's doing well with the fraternity. Obviously, you know, it's never enough unless it's perfect. But it's great to see it going in the right direction. So again, I wanted to say thank you for coming on and talking with us and kind of sharing so that we can get this discussion going. Thanks. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that was a really insightful interview with RJ. I think that he brought up a lot of great points. Really touched on a lot of the topics that we spoke about in class, a lot of the sociological concepts. Specifically, I thought his points regarding the social pressures and the social role that he was expected to fall into, whether it was pushed on him or whether he just felt that. I think that was really interesting to bring up.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really interesting how he talked about how, he's not even in a social fraternity, but he still had these preconceived notions about what that might be, what it might look like for him to be part of.
Sure.
Because, he was interested in rushing originally, but he had this fear of what it might turn him into. Not necessarily turn him into, but more of like what he might be, of what role he might be pushed into, yeah.
No, I think that's super interesting. I think it was also interesting to see that those preconceived notions aren't even based specifically on Northeastern's fraternity life, but are really a reflection of his experience in high school and just growing up. I'm not sure what his high school was like, but just getting that idea and the societal image of what a fraternity is, who he's supposed to be, and how those interplay. So without even having really any experience with a social fraternity, he still feels those pressures, even if they're not directly put onto him.
Well, yeah, it's probably has something to do with the homophobia he faced during high school, which
Sure.
you talked about earlier.
Absolutely. I think he mentioned that he, at least to myself, I'm not sure if in the interview, he's from a smaller town upstate in New York. So, New York being usually better with that, but I know it can get a little rough, especially in smaller schools and environments. So I think it'd be really interesting to see, or I think it really is interesting to see how that kind of translates into the college environment, especially in more of a progressive environment such as Northeastern. I think it was also really interesting to see the difference he expressed between his pre-professional law fraternity, how he said he never really felt any pressures in there specifically, versus his experience with social fraternities?
Well, it really might be because of how social fraternities are usually geared towards not people that are looking to further their academic experience, but more of their social one, which really has a lot to do with the caliber of the person that joined these frats.
So you think it's a level of professionalism that's brought to it. Do you think that those individuals are less inclined to promote those social pressures based on who they are, or just the environment that they're in?
I wouldn't say that they're less inclined to promote those ideals, but I would say that there's definitely less of a reason for them to do it because of their frat.
So you think it's more of an environment based?
Yes, definitely.
Interesting. So next up, we're going to play a clip of a discussion we were able to have with a friend of mine, Rashmika Bisam. Rashmika is the current Diversity and Inclusion Chair in our medical fraternity, Phi Delta Epsilon, and was nice enough to talk with us about her experience with fraternity culture as a frat member, as well as her more recent experience as a leadership role.
Yeah, let's listen to that clip.
Hi, Rashmika. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us today. We really appreciate it. Would you mind introducing yourself and talking just a little bit about your involvement with FIDE?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. So, a little bit about myself. My name is Rashmika Bisam. I'm from Long Island. I'm a third-year biology and mathematics combined major at Northeastern, and I've been in FIDE since my fall semester, second year. So, I became the D&I chair my second semester with FIDE, so my spring semester, second year. And it's been a lot of fun. I do a lot with educating members about whether it's involvement, marginalized groups' efforts in medicine, or whether it's trying to give resources to our other members of the fraternity with scholarships, internship opportunities over the summer, anything like that. So whatever we can get our hands on, anything to really make sure we're helping bridge the gap in medicine.
Awesome. And just to be clear, the D&I is diversity and inclusion.
Yes.
Okay.
Wow, that's really great. Thank you. So I think we could start off with you telling us a little bit about your experience as a diversity chair of a fraternity, specifically what issues, if any, you've faced since taking your position, and have you taken any actions to try and remedy these problems?
So my first semester when I was my first semester as D&I chair, we actually had a small problem with some marginalized groups when it came to our recruitment, and they came to us afterwards and they told us that they feel like they face a lot of discrimination in the recruitment process, and we talked about them, had a little meeting about it, and we addressed concerns that they had, and they talked about the issue with non-Black students using AAVE, and along with some other, how they felt like they had to code switch and things like that, where they felt like they were in an environment that they weren't fully comfortable with, and that's because of the lack of diversity from marginalized groups in FIDE. So in order to work on that, we started we talked more about D&I at recruitment meetings, and we tried to make sure all people rushing knew what they were going to come into contact with when it came to FIDE, and we're also trying to like make sure in terms of diversity, we are trying to really push for trying to recruit through cultural organizations, other things like that. So these are small efforts, and it's hard when it's a school like Northeastern, which doesn't have a large minority population in terms of Black and Hispanic students. So we're trying our best to try and get people from those groups, because again, FIDE is a great place for marginalized groups, and it has a lot of opportunities. So whatever we can do.
Sure, that's great. I think just for people who might not know, AAVE is African American English Vernacular.
Vernacular English.
Vernacular English.
Yep.
I think that's great that you guys are kind of reaching out to those minority groups on campus. I think that's a really great way to try to get more of an integration, more of a diversity demographic in the fraternity. So kind of moving on, do you think that these same issues are present within other fraternities on campus? Do you think they're better or worse? And then on that, do you think that, I know that we are a medical fraternity. Do you think that these issues are present in kind of graduate fraternities as well, especially in FIDE in the medical field?
So in terms of other fraternities on campus, I can at least say with professional fraternities, I feel like there is also still a lack of diversity in a lot of other fraternities. And I think it's also just a part of it has to do just with the given nature of Northeastern, where it is a primarily white institute, and it's and a lot of overrepresented minorities and Asian people. So I know in the fraternity there's there's a comment being made constantly with like there's a lot of POC, but in terms of POC representation, it's more Asian people and not really like Black or Hispanic members. So I think that's more of a fault on the school itself, and it's hard to try and improve diversity in your own organization when there's a lack of diversity overall. But even so, I think it's something that we should always all focus on. And I think Phi DE, at least because we are still a newer organization on campus, it's one that's more malleable and more willing to change its ways and willing to fix things that we notice that are wrong. So whether it's bringing more diverse speakers, whether it's all the opportunities, community service, all this other stuff, like working with other organizations on campus that do focus on marginalized groups and things like that, like that's something that we are easily able to accommodate to. But older organizations on campus might not be as free moving, you know, because they have their own rituals, they have their own like exactly. So it's Phi DE is a little bit easier to work with, but other organizations I'm not too sure on. I just think that it's a prevalent problem, and I think it's something that we're all trying to address.
Absolutely. You know, I think that's definitely, you know, in my experience at least, I've seen kind of the same issues that you've spoken about, the code switching, the AAVE, and just lack of diversity. But I think I agree with what you say. It's tricky to make that, you know, melting pot of diversity and culture when you're kind of in a very, very non-diverse environment.
So, as many know, being part of a fraternity isn't necessarily free or cheap, but do you think that being in a fraternity, that fraternity dues provide a socioeconomic barrier, creating a class disparity within Greek life? I know that some social fraternities offer opportunities for financial aid. Have you been a part of or seen any efforts to help counteract this, such as subsidizing costs for those that can't afford it within your own professional fraternity?
So this is actually an issue I saw, I think, when I first wanted to be D9 chair, and I realized that money is a huge issue. It's always going to be an issue. Sure. A lot of students are here on scholarships and grants and things like that. So it was something we brought up. And the problem with at least Phi DE is that we have an international dues and our local dues and things like that. And those international dues have to be paid. So we were trying to figure out, oh, maybe we get funding through another source and things like that. But it's hard to do every semester this type of funding because it's going to be constant. And we need to make sure that wherever we're getting that source money from can constantly give us that money. And there's no guarantee for that. So what we did instead was we started a payment plan where it's like instead of paying all at once, if you bring up this concern to either the BPF or whoever handles the finances, they will do a monthly sort of payment plan or like whatever works best for you. So at the end of the day, like we're still getting the dues that you need, but you're not as forced or you don't feel as pressured to like pay it immediately or have to worry about scrambling to get the money. Especially when you're a new recruit, it's like $250 your fall semester when you rush, and it's like it's
that's
a lot.
relatively cheap compared to other fraternities.
It is relatively cheap, but it's also like some people just can't.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Conjure up $250 out of thin air. So I think having a payment plan is like the best thing we could do for now. I wish there was more we could do, but it's constraints by national and international organization.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Maybe in the future they can work on maybe providing scholarships for students that can't necessarily afford to pay their dues.
Or diversity grants or something, just kind of assisting. But, you know, I think that's kind of wraps it up. Thank you for coming on and talking with us. I think you brought up a lot of great points and really brought a lot to the conversation. So we really appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So that was Rashmika. I think she did a incredible job, incredibly insightful, really just great, bubbly person, and I think she brought a lot to the conversation. And I think a lot of the points that she brought up kind of reflected and mirrored the same kind of ideas and experience that RJ had with the social roles being pushed on individuals. But I think a lot of the new points that she brought up were just as, if not more, important. One specifically being the socioeconomic disparities that are affecting the diversity of the Russian class, of the pledge classes, and how that affects not only based on a class system, but also on affects disproportionately minorities.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a pretty big deterrent especially for minority groups who historically have much lower incomes. I mean, you know, some of the universities in the South the dues can be nearly $6,000 per semester. Obviously, you know, Northeastern, it's not as big of a deal here. So, but it can still be pretty expensive. They can range from $100 to $1,000 each semester, depending on where you join.
Sure, yeah. I think that with the pre-professional frat, Phi E, I think that she said it was somewhere around 200 to 250 for your initial. And while that's on the lower end relative to Northeastern's range and specifically, or more expansively, the general fraternity scene, that's still a lot to pay per semester for an individual who might be hurting economically, especially if there's not grants or subsidies offered for individuals of color or individuals who might be in a lower socioeconomic class.
Yeah, well, I mean, something disgusting I learned during my research process was that, dues aren't necessarily released during the pledging process.
Mm-hmm.
And, you might not know how much you have to pay until after you're initiated, which
Sure.
could be too late. And,
You spend all that time and then you realize, solely based on a economic barrier, you might not be able to get into a fraternity.
yeah, you might not be able to have these
Yes,
opportunities and
no, yeah.
these networking connections that other people that are more
Mm-hmm.
wealthy and monetarily inclined might have, just because of that sole reason.
Sure, I think that's another great point. I think we talked about in class just the ability individuals have to kind of inherit that wealth and therefore inherit experience and lead to reproductive economic standing and societal standing, which I think is very easily seen there. If you come from a family of wealth and get into a good school and then are able to pay fraternity dues for the best fraternity and get the best networking opportunities, then compared to an individual who might have that socioeconomic barrier, you're getting a completely different experience and therefore different opportunities and playing on a completely different playing field, really.
Mm-hmm. So, these economic disparities really lead to a whole new level of not having diversity in these
Mm-hmm.
campus frats. And I mean, people try a lot of the times to create new ones that maybe are more inclusive, have lower dues, and work harder to reach a bigger audience and a bigger group of people. But a lot of the times, the Greek Life Board will oppose creation of these new groups solely based on they don't want more people with more diverse backgrounds to be members of Greek life.
It's interesting. It's a really big problem, and I think that I think it's great that Rashmika said she was doing with the Diversity and Inclusion Board a lot to, as well as the financing board, a lot to try and get subsidies and grants for individuals who might need it. I think another really important point she brought up that kind of leads into our next interviewee was the concept of code switching and just that being a really big issue in the pledging process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, with the whole pressure of feeling your social identity maybe is changing because you join a frat, a lot of minorities maybe come from different cultures and have different values than what frats want.
Sure.
And so, it can be really intimidating.
You try to play in and switch up who you are and where you come from to try to kind of meet what you think the frat experience and the frat individual might be.
That's not right. I mean,
Sure.
that shouldn't be how it is.
No. And I think it goes the other way as well. I think when she talked about the AAV, I think it was really interesting to see that while individuals are pushed into the social roles that they believe need to be had for a frat, it also goes the other way where frat or fraternity people in fraternity life might be kind of taking advantage of your position, not being able to speak up against them and saying taking part in your culture or in your vernacular, and that might make certain individuals uncomfortable, but since they're at the stage that they are in pledging, are unable to speak up out against that. And if there's not certain systems put in place to allow for that reporting and that discussion to be open, that creates a really big problem.
Yeah, I mean, it really all ties back to the whole societal roles and pressure to fit your specific niche. But
Yeah.
I think it's a good place to wrap up and move on to our next discussion.
Absolutely. So we're going to be introducing our next interviewee.
So the last interview we had was actually with a friend of ours that we met our freshman year, Terrell Extivor Cox. Terrell actually had an experience with rushing a fraternity this past semester, and we were able to ask him about his experience with fraternity Russian culture as an African American man.
All right, so we're going to play that clip and then talk about it a little bit afterwards as well.
Welcome, Terrell. It's great to have you on the show today. Why don't you introduce yourself and take a minute to talk about your participation in Greek life on campus?
For sure. I'm Terrell Cox. I'm a sophomore at Northeastern University, and I rushed for the first time this fall. Greek life is pretty small at our school. It's kind of like a tight-knit community, and I feel as if you are in Greek life, you know I've been in Greek life, and then if you are super social and definitely a good girl, you know what Greek life is. Guys, it's a little different of a dynamic, so that's like my little synopsis of it, but yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks. Maybe just kind of going off of that, would you mind talking about why exactly you wanted to rush and a little bit about the pledging process and how that went?
Yeah, so I kind of feel as if at Northeastern, a lot of the social life is revolved around Greek life itself, and the aspect that constant outlets or like constant plans are kind of made through Greek life, and I was kind of struggling to really find something like that outside of it. And then a lot of my female friends who are in sororities or just go to like a lot of the stuff or kind of like peer pressure was like, yeah, definitely consider it, like it's so much fun. And then the guy friends the same thing because like they all like to support their own affiliation. But I think it's just a kind of like a hybrid of just finding an outlet, like a consistent outlet to do things, and then meeting new people at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with you on the whole pressure aspect of how you felt like there's not really that much to do on campus. You're pressured to join the frat. Now going more off that idea of pressure, as one of the only African American members of your pledge class, did you feel that there were any social pressures within the pledge process that maybe made you conform to some societal beliefs of what an African American man is, or maybe more towards the role of an ideal frat boy?
I wouldn't say I would personally succumb to a lot of those things, but I think like I have friends too that go to other schools that I know have like experienced like them changing from the outside looking in, and I like that kind of like helped me not succumb to a lot of different things, because it's okay to say no to like a lot of things that I ask you to do, or like talk and sit down with people and say like, oh, I'm not comfortable doing this. So not necessarily myself, but I do think that a lot of like minority pledges or even brothers like do alter their personality as a result of trying to like conform to the fraternity joining process. Great question.
Gotcha. I definitely agree. I think it's probably a little more diluted on the Northeastern campus, but definitely in the general Greek scene, it's absolutely, you feel those pressures and whatnot. Kind of going off of that as well, we were hoping you would talk about maybe your own experiences, or I know you said you have some friends in Greek life in other schools. Maybe if they had faced any form of discrimination or heard about any form of discrimination with on-campus fraternities, and then if there were any times that they felt that they were specifically targeted based on their race or socioeconomic status.
No, for sure. So we kind of in like this weird point in society where like racism is very prevalent, but at the same time like a lot of black culture is extremely popular. So you'll see like certain fraternities like target black people because they want a black person in the fraternity, kind of like tokenizing that one person. So like I've experienced that here, where people are like, oh, like what are you doing, bro? Like definitely got to come out to our rush event, and I can like filter when people are being genuine because they want to know who I am versus like they see me and they like are attracted to that. So I'd say that there's that aspect, and then with discrimination on the other end, it's just like I've been called other people that are in Greek life because there's so little of us that they just assume that we're all the same person. So it works both ways, both for me or for the African American community and against us, in the sense that there's a whole spectrum of what people want from you as a rush or a pledge or just even a friend to someone.
Yeah, I mean, I really can't help but agree with you on the whole tokenization aspect on that. I myself, as a Jewish man, have felt tokenized in my involvement in certain clubs and other things, especially more in high school, but not as much now in college. But yeah, I mean, I think that wraps up our
discussion. Is there anything to say, Trace?
No, I definitely agree. I think that you bring a really interesting perspective to it and bring up a lot of really good topics and ideas about it. I want to say thank you for coming on and talking with us for a bit. We really appreciate it. You bring a lot to the discussion. So yeah, just thanks for coming out.
I appreciate you too as well. Have a good one.
Awesome, thank you.
So that was Terrell. I think he brought a lot of, again, just really incredible points to the discussion. I think he built a lot off of what Rashmika had been saying about the code switching and the problems with minority groups, the problems minority groups face in fraternities.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, a lot of what he said when he had talked about his experience rushing was very interesting. I thought he brought a really cool perspective to that.
Well, he talked about he himself didn't really experience too much of it. He said, he feels like he felt that he was able to rise above that. But he said that a lot of his friends that are minorities have had real issues with overcoming that and struggled with, sticking to their own social identity rather than being pushed into the role that these frats form.
Absolutely. I think it was also a really interesting point when he brought up the fact that he felt as though when he went to these events and he was being, talked to by different individuals from different fraternities, they'd tell him, come join, come rush us. And he said he was able to kind of delineate between, or rather differentiate between who was genuine and who was just kind of targeting him due to his, due to his skin color.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really interesting to see that kind of prevalence of tokenism when you're trying to build a diverse crowd, like what counts as tokenism versus what counts as trying to really bring about diversity.
Well, there's a lot of pressure on frats nowadays to really bring in more diverse crowds.
Sure.
But a lot of the steps that they're taking really just delegitimizes the membership of non-white frat brothers. There's a whole research article about it called "A Paradox of Participation: Non-Whites in White Sororities and Fraternities," and a lot of it goes into how really they feel like a lot of people feel that they're looked at differently within the frat because sometimes people feel that they were only bidded because of their skin color or their other social identity that they might have.
Absolutely, and while that might, frauders might attempt to bring on these individuals in the name of diversity, in the name of inclusion, it's kind of a double-edged sword where you bring them on to try to fight that racist undertone or the prejudice undertone, but are in reality perpetuating those same undertones, just in a different light.
Yeah, it's really all about, I guess, the motives that people have when they go into diversifying a group, because a lot of it feels like performative activism that we see a lot of today.
Absolutely. I think that's actually a really good point, and I think that, going back to Rashmika, just kind of the methods that she had tried to attempt to bring about with, outsourcing into the minority groups on campus and just kind of getting the word out, that versus going up to an African-American individual at a party and saying, hey, you should rush us. There are ways to kind of really bring about activism and change, and I definitely do think that, Terrell unfortunately had an experience with much more the performative end of that, which is unfortunate.
It really is, yeah.
I think it's actually definitely more prevalent in other schools, and in, it's definitely a very prevalent issue, especially outside of the more progressive Northeastern environment.
Yeah, I mean, you really, especially at the University of Alabama, recently there was, I think, last year, out of the hundreds of people that joined sororities at this school, there were 2 members that were not white that joined, and there was a whole public spectacle about it. A lot of people took notice to that, and that's
something to notice.
Yeah, it is, but is it something to notice for what reason? I mean, did they do this so that they would get attention for it, or is it something that just happened and was received? Because these sororities are historically almost all white. I mean, the first African American woman to join a sorority at the University of Alabama was in 2003.
Wow, that is a interesting statistic, and I think that really outlines, while there are changes, especially with the current political environment in the United States, there are pushes to get that more progressive change. It's easy to think that that's been kind of the idea always, but it really is just recently that you're seeing these changes, which are good, but maybe are just not enough yet. Hopefully we start to see a little bit more. I know, again, Rashmika and Terrell both touched on the fact that there is increases with the rise in genuine political activism in the United States. So hopefully we'll see a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I think we had a really great discussion today, talking to all of our guests and kind of discussing what they went over and how it relates to a number of different sociological concepts. I think that while, keeping in mind that it is about fraternities and just specifically Northeastern fraternities, but fraternities in general, someone might say, these are important issues, but how does this really apply outside of college? Seeing as college is, temporary, you don't have to elect to take part in fraternities or Greek life at all, really, if you don't want to. And to that, I think the argument can really be brought up that these are not just fraternity issues. Fraternities and the college experience might act as a microcosm for these issues on the scale of the United States and even globally. Minority groups face the same issues they might face in the pledge class, getting jobs. Socioeconomic people or people with socioeconomic disparities. Who, if I can't get into a fraternity because of my socioeconomic class, leading to less networking and opportunities and less opportunities with jobs and internships, that's prevalent in the real world as well. That these real issues become prevalent on a very large scale outside.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that whole real world discussion, because while being in a frat in college is, it's talking about, it has real world implications. You think about the power of 2% is Cornell's Pan-Hellenic Council's motto, I would say. Only 2% of America's population is involved in fraternities, but nearly 80% of Fortune 500 executives, 76% of the US Senate and Congress, and 85% of Supreme Court justices were all involved in Greek life in school. And the most shocking statistic of all to me was that all but 2 presidents have been fraternity men, and one of them was former President Barack Obama, the only African-American president in the United States. And, it makes you think, how many of those Fortune 500 executives and Supreme Court justices, how many of them were white?
I think that's an incredibly interesting point, and I think that if you were to look at it, there's a number of ways to look at that, right? You could say, were these individuals given opportunities through the fraternities, the networking and the opportunities we've discussed before, leading them to these positions? Or are these individuals, like we'd also said, individuals better off, right? Were they individuals with higher socioeconomic class, maybe coming from backgrounds not faced by those, by the difficulties that minority backgrounds might be faced with? And just, it's a reflection, whether they get into fraternities is a reflection of how well they do in real life because they follow the same rules. Both of which are, incredibly interesting takes and kind of really talk or show how important the, topics discussed today are in real world application.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up. What do you think?
Absolutely. So I think we had a really great session today. I feel like we really explored the intricacies of what it's like to be involved in Greek life and the impact on our social identities that our social identities have on our interactions with these groups.
Yeah, I completely agree. I thought this was a really insightful discussion. It really gave me a better understanding of the implications of being a member of a minority group within the fraternity, or even just looking at it from the outside as a minority member. It was also great to hear from such a diverse group of interviewees that have all had their own unique experiences with Greek life and frat culture.
Absolutely. Again, we just want to reiterate 100%. You just give another thank you to everybody that participated today. We really appreciate the ability to have a conversation about the issues plaguing Greek life, not only at Northeastern, but at all fraternities, and that, kind of work out into the real world.
Yeah, definitely. It's what makes it so important to think about Northeastern as a microcosm, as our actual society. It's such an incredibly diverse place, but there are still so many systemic issues with the way that race is looked at in our culture.
Awesome. That's a really great take. So I'm Chase Santoriella.
I'm Jack Long.
And this has been the College Experience, a discussion on diversity.